The room erupted in polite applause, the kind that doesn't quite reach anyone's eyes. I smiled, clapped along with everyone else, and stared at the balloon arch behind the cake that read, "Congrats on 10 years," in oversized silver letters. 10 years. A full decade of showing up early, staying late, mentoring every new hire, fixing every spreadsheet that mysteriously broke, and saving every presentation that almost got tanked before a client pitch. And now, on the day that was supposed to mean something, I watched my intern, Kyle, step forward to accept my raise, my promotion, and my future. "Let's give it up for Kyle," my boss beamed. "He's only been here a year, but innovation speaks for itself. This is what fresh thinking looks like." I tilted my head and applauded louder, my hands stinging slightly. I had to admire the showmanship. The cruelty of it was almost artistic. "My name is Nora. I'm 36, and I'm the Senior Operations Analyst at Vantage Systems, Inc. Well, was. This is the story of how they thought they could quietly erase me, and how, calmly, quietly, I gave them a Monday they'll never forget. When I joined Vantage 10 years ago, it was nothing more than a struggling logistics firm with 10 employees and no direction. I was 26, broke, and grateful to be anywhere with heating. I learned every tool, every system, and built entire operational pipelines from scratch. People stopped calling me Nora. I became the fixer, the one they pulled in when something was broken, too risky, or needed to be rewritten overnight. When Kyle joined last summer, fresh from a startup job that lasted 3 months, he was energetic, charming, and completely lost. I spent weeks training him. I even rewrote his onboarding materials because HR hadn't updated them since 2017. He made errors. Many. He once overwrote a live invoice database, and I spent 6 hours recovering it. He sent the wrong report to the COO. I cleaned it up before she even opened it. But Kyle? He was good at looking confident. And confidence, I've learned, is a performance art. I remember exactly how it happened. There were cupcakes in the break room, and someone brought in a gold-framed certificate for me. My name in block letters with the phrase "loyal dedication" printed underneath. My boss, Darren, gave a speech filled with the usual cliches. "And let's not forget our Nora," he said, barely glancing at me. 10 years. That's rare these days. Consistency is valuable. But innovation? He turned toward Kyle, who was already stepping forward with a smile. "Innovation is the future, and we've decided that Kyle will be taking on the role of Associate Director of Operations moving forward. He's shown initiative, and his vision aligns with where we're headed. Congrats, Kyle." A few awkward glances bounced around the room. Even Beth from HR stopped chewing for a moment. I didn't say a word. I smiled, clapped again, and nodded graciously. "You're taking this well," Darren whispered later at my desk, chuckling as if we were old friends. "You know, you've got to keep up. Gen Z moves fast. We need fresh ideas, not just experience." Fresh ideas. Right. What Darren didn't know, and what no one in that room had realized, was that 2 months ago, I'd quietly launched NVM Consulting, a digital logistics firm tailored to mid-market clients, powered by a proprietary AI-based system I'd been coding for the past 3 years. On my own time. With my own money. And with the legal blessing of a very expensive intellectual property attorney. As of this week, NVM had 5 clients, including 2 of Vantage's top-tier partners who had approached me discreetly after I presented a hypothetical model at a networking event in April. They loved the model. They signed immediately, and their contracts went into effect this Monday. "You okay?" Kyle asked as we crossed paths at the coffee machine, still basking in his hollow promotion glow. "Perfect," I replied. "Looking forward to Monday." He laughed like it was a joke. I smiled with him. But I wasn't joking. Because on Monday morning, when Darren opens his inbox, he'll find 2 resignation letters from 2 major clients. Letters I drafted myself. And when he calls their offices in a panic, he won't know that the name he'll hear on the other end of the line isn't a stranger. It'll be mine. Nora Valentine Meyer, CEO of their new vendor. Most people assume revenge is loud, that it slams doors and flips tables. But mine was quiet, methodical, strategic. Like the way you slowly tighten a valve until the pressure builds so high it breaks the whole machine, and no one hears the crack until it's too late. That's exactly what I'd been doing for the past 3 years. It started the day I realized Darren wasn't ever going to promote me. I'd led a 6-month project that saved the company $2.4 million. My reward? A gift card to a restaurant that had gone out of business 6 weeks earlier. No bonus, no title change. Just a casual pat on the back in a team meeting Darren barely stayed awake through. That night, I stayed in the office long after the lights dimmed. I opened a blank notebook and wrote 3 words. Build your exit. Not quit, not leave. I wanted something more than escape. I wanted leverage, legacy, independence. I didn't quit my job. I did something worse. I stayed. But I stopped building their systems and quietly started building mine. At night, in my apartment, I coded the core of what would become the NVM system, a logistics optimization tool powered by predictive AI. I consulted freelance data scientists, negotiated back-end licenses, tested user interface flows on weekends. I opened a bank account, then a business account. Then I formed an LLC under a quiet shell name, Fifth Arc Holdings. Nobody noticed. Darren thought I was boring. Kyle thought I was outdated. My coworkers thought I was loyal. They all underestimated me, which, funnily enough, became my greatest advantage. I remember the first client I landed. It wasn't even on purpose. I was at a conference, half listening to a panel while sipping burnt hotel coffee, when a woman sat beside me and started venting about her company's supply chain issues. I offered a few ideas. She was intrigued. I mentioned I'd been developing a model. 3 weeks later, she signed a pilot contract. The moment she did, I knew I wasn't just dreaming anymore. I was in business. And yet, back at Vantage, things carried on like nothing had changed. Every Friday, I updated Kyle's reports because he couldn't remember which spreadsheet was live. Every Monday, I listened to Darren make jokes about millennials, Gen Z, and real leadership, while I quietly closed deals through the consulting firm he didn't know existed. It was poetic, really. But it wasn't just about the business. It was about all the things they didn't see. The nights I stayed until 2 a.m. to prep Darren's board pitches because he forgot he had a presentation. The times I covered for Kyle's errors so he wouldn't get fired. The meetings I wasn't invited to, even though the numbers they presented were mine. They saw me as a fixture, a dependable background prop, not a player. And the truth is, it hurt. Even when you know your worth, it still hurts when people don't even bother to look. When your name doesn't get mentioned, when your seat is always just outside the main table. But instead of fighting for their table, I started building my own. 2 weeks before my anniversary surprise, I met with our top client, Delphar Logistics, for a casual dinner. They were frustrated with Vantage. Too slow, too rigid, too old school. I showed them what I was working on. Just a taste. They asked if I could implement it for them. I said yes. They signed the contract the following Tuesday. A day later, Northgate Freight, another Vantage partner, reached out after hearing about a new AI system making waves. They wanted in too. By the time I walked into that break room filled with streamers and lukewarm cupcakes, my company had already secured $2.3 million in committed contracts. And no one in that room knew. Not Darren. Not Kyle. Not even HR. "You've always been consistent," Darren had said. Like I was a piece of dependable office furniture. But consistency without recognition is a slow kind of erasure. And I was done disappearing. I didn't cry when they gave Kyle the promotion. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. Because while they were celebrating a title, I was holding something far more powerful. Ownership, control, and a very specific plan for Monday. One that involved 2 resignation letters, a system shutdown, and a boardroom meeting that no one would forget. I smiled as I walked past Kyle's desk that afternoon. He had his feet up scrolling TikTok. "Have a great weekend," he said, grinning. "You too," I replied. And I meant it, because mine was about to be unforgettable. The sun rose like any other Monday, but the air felt different. Charged. I took my time getting dressed. No more bland corporate slacks or muted tones. This morning, I wore a sharp navy blazer over a black silk blouse and matching tailored pants. Understated, but quietly expensive. Professional, but with edge. Today was the day I'd waited 3 years for. The day they would see me. Not as loyal Nora or background Nora or she's just always here, Nora, but as what I'd always been. Essential. I walked into Vantage's building at 8:05 a.m. Just a few minutes late on purpose, enough to raise an eyebrow without suspicion. I wanted to see it all unfold live. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. A couple of junior staff nodded at me awkwardly. Someone from finance complimented my jacket. "You look different today," he said. "I feel different," I replied. I stepped onto the operations floor and immediately sensed the shift. Darren's office door was open. His voice, usually smug and lazy, was sharp, panicked. "No, this doesn't make sense. Why would they cancel out of nowhere? Did you double-check the email headers? This has to be a mistake." I walked calmly to my desk, set down my bag, and opened my laptop. One of the interns, Mia, leaned over from across the desk. "Hey, did you hear? Delphar Logistics just pulled out. Something about a new vendor?" I nodded slowly. That's unexpected. I watched Darren through the glass walls of his office. He was pacing now, sweating, his tie already loosened. Another call came in. This time it was Northgate. His face drained of color. By 8:32 a.m., the entire executive floor was buzzing. I heard whispers from the marketing team. Someone from legal ran down the hallway. It was trying to access a platform they no longer had credentials for. By 8:45 a.m., a meeting request went out. All staff urgent, 9 a.m., conference room A. It was happening. Kyle breezed in at 8:50 a.m., Starbucks cup in hand, sunglasses still on. "What's going on?" he asked, sliding into his new office, my old corner cubicle. No one answered. The mood had changed, and even he felt it. Darren emerged just before 9 o'clock, red-faced, trying to appear in control. "We need all department leads in the main conference room now," he barked. Kyle blinked. I guess that's me now," he said, glancing at me for validation. I gave him a polite smile. "Yes, that's you." Then I stood up and followed him. The room was filled with confused department heads, middle managers, and assistants, everyone murmuring. I sat near the back quietly. Darren stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. "We've had a couple of unexpected developments this morning. Delphar and Northgate have both terminated their contracts with immediate effect. No notice, just dropped us." Gasps and whispers rippled across the room. "These were 2 of our top 5 clients," Darren continued, "and they've both cited strategic realignment and vendor consolidation as the reasons. I don't know what that means yet, but we're investigating." He didn't know because I hadn't told him. What it meant was that both clients were now fully contracted with my firm, NVM Consulting, and by noon my systems would be live. "But that's not all," Darren added. "We've also discovered that our operations platform, our internal process tracker, has been disabled. Apparently the licensing agreement expired Friday. We're working to renew it immediately." Except they couldn't, because that license wasn't Vantage's. It was mine. Registered through my Shell LLC, licensed to Vantage as a third-party integration under a limited 3-year term. A term that had expired Friday at 11:59 p.m. "What does this mean?" Kyle finally spoke, confused. "Can't we just, turn it back on?" Darren's jaw clenched. "No, Kyle. We can't just turn it back on." I watched their panic build like water behind a dam. I waited for the question I knew would come. And at 9:11 a.m., it did. "Does anyone know more about this system?" Darren asked, scanning the room. "Who developed it originally?" Slowly, every head turned toward me. I smiled. Just a little. Just enough. I built the original framework, I said evenly, 3 years ago, as part of my role here. But, Darren stammered, but that's proprietary. It's Vantage property. Not quite, I replied calmly. If you check the agreement signed in 2021, you'll see the software was licensed, not owned, under a different company name. All legal. You might want your legal team to review it again. Silence. Pure, uncomfortable silence. What company? Someone asked. I looked up. NVM Consulting. More silence. Then, what does NVM stand for? I stood up, straightened my jacket. Nora Valentine Meyer. Kyle's mouth fell open. Darren just sat down. Slowly, like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. And then I delivered the final blow. There's one more thing, I added, pausing. I'll be submitting my resignation today. Effective immediately. Though I suppose in many ways I already left a long time ago. I turned to walk out, but paused at the door. Oh, and just so you're aware, Northgate and Delphar asked me to schedule a meeting with their new vendor this afternoon. That vendor is me. And with that, I left. By noon that day, my name was everywhere inside Vantage, whispered in disbelief, repeated in fragments like an urban legend. Some called it betrayal. Others called it genius. But I didn't care what they called it. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't invisible. I took the rest of the afternoon off. Not because I was tired. I wasn't. I was alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. But because I knew the phone calls were coming. Sure enough, by 2 p.m., I had 5 missed calls from Darren, 2 from HR, and a desperate voicemail from Kyle that began with, "Hey, so I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." There hadn't been, and by 2:30 p.m., both Delphar and Northgate had confirmed the launch of our systems, on schedule, without a hitch. They were thrilled, efficient, seamless, better than anything they'd had with Vantage. By 3 p.m., I was sitting in my favorite cafe across from Samir, my business attorney, reviewing final paperwork for a new office lease. A real office this time. No more co-working spaces or late-night coding from my kitchen table. "Nora," he said, flipping through the contracts. "You understand what just happened, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't just leave a job. You flipped the board. You didn't just walk out. You took the engine with you and left them with the shell." I sipped my coffee. "Is that your legal opinion?" He grinned. "Number, that's my personal admiration." But once the adrenaline started to fade, the silence came. The quiet of stepping away from something that had consumed a decade of my life. The strange stillness of no longer needing to prove myself to people who never saw me in the first place. It hit me that evening as I sat alone on my balcony overlooking the city. The skyline had always felt so distant. But now it looked different. Not unreachable, but earned. 10 years is a long time to give to people who never said thank you. And yet, there was grief in the letting go. Grief for the version of me that had once believed being loyal would be enough. A text came in from Lisa, one of the junior analysts I'd mentored. "Is it true? Did you really build your own company? Can I talk to you?" I stared at the message for a while, then typed, "Yes. Let's talk tomorrow." Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about rebuilding something better. Not just for me, but for the people still stuck under the glass ceiling I'd just shattered. By the end of the week, 3 other employees from Vantage reached out. One from IT, one from marketing, and Beth from HR. Each message had the same tone. "I want out. I want in." I didn't promise them anything yet. I wasn't building an empire overnight, but I was building it. Carefully, intentionally. On Friday, a package arrived at my apartment. No note, no return address. Inside, the framed certificate I'd received at the celebration. Loyal dedication, Nora Meyer, 10 years of service. There was a faint coffee stain on the corner, like someone had set a cup on it before mailing it off. I laughed. Not out of humor, but the kind of laugh you give when something is so small, so petty, that it proves everything you ever suspected. I set the frame face down in a drawer and closed it. That weekend, I met my parents for dinner. They didn't know everything, just that I'd left the company. My dad, ever the traditionalist, raised an eyebrow. No pension? No severance? No need, I said. I've already replaced the income. He nodded slowly, not understanding. My mother smiled politely and changed the subject to my cousin's wedding. They wouldn't get it. Not yet. But that was okay. This win wasn't for them. It was for the version of myself who had once sat in meetings and swallowed disappointment like it was breakfast. For the nights I spent working overtime while Kyle got drinks with Darren. For every time I had to explain my worth to people who refused to see it. On Monday morning, Vantage released a carefully worded company-wide email. Due to unforeseen transitions, we are restructuring our operations division and reevaluating client partnerships. What they didn't mention was that the restructure involved losing 2 major contracts, an internal system collapse, and the person who used to keep everything running without applause. But I didn't need them to say it, because everyone knew. And now, everyone was watching. By the second week, Vantage Systems was unraveling quietly. No news articles, no dramatic collapse. Just silence. Missed deadlines. Canceled meetings. Confused clients. And behind it all, the growing realization that I had been the thread holding the entire thing together. They didn't know it yet, but they'd built the company on my back. I just finally stood up. I got an email from Beth in HR. Confidentially, legal's trying to figure out how they didn't catch the software licensing loophole. They're panicking. Apparently the system you developed? None of them knew it wasn't built in-house. She added a single sentence. I'd like to talk about working with you, if that's on the table. I stared at it for a while. I remembered Beth sitting through endless performance reviews, watching people like me get meets expectations, while others, mostly louder and male, got exceeds expectations for doing half the work. Maybe she saw what was happening all along. Maybe she didn't. But now, even she wanted out. It was strange being the one people wanted to follow. For so long, I had moved through Vantage like a shadow. Dependable, unremarkable, quietly competent. Now, people who never made eye contact were messaging me. Let's grab coffee. Would love to get your thoughts. You're an inspiration. But I didn't want admiration. I wanted something else. Respect. Not the kind you ask for. The kind you earn when you walk away from the fire you built, and it collapses without you. Kyle sent me a message too. Hi, Nora. No idea how you pulled this off, but congrats, I guess. Darren's losing it. He wants to talk. Says we can figure something out. He's offering some kind of consultant role. 6 figures, flexible hours. Sounded desperate. I didn't reply. I'd had 6-figure offers before. What I never had was autonomy, ownership, voice. Darren's offer came too late. Besides, I wasn't available. I had meetings lined up with 2 new clients, one in biotech, one in international shipping. Both had found me through referrals. Both had signed NDAs, and both wanted exactly what I built. A solution designed by someone who knew how broken traditional systems really were. At my new office, still half-furnished but filled with energy, I met with Lisa, the junior analyst from Vantage. She looked nervous, a little out of place, like she hadn't quite decided whether this was bravery or betrayal. I handed her a coffee. You okay? She nodded. Honestly, I'm tired. I kept thinking that if I just worked harder, maybe they'd notice. But when you left, I realized they only notice when you disappear. I smiled. Same reason I started building. She looked down. I want to learn from you. I don't want to be invisible anymore. I didn't hesitate. You're in. Because this wasn't just about leaving something broken behind. It was about building something better. With the right people. By week 3, rumors started flying. An anonymous blog post appeared online titled, "When the woman who built your company leaves, what happens next?" The writer never named names, but it didn't matter. Everyone at Vantage recognized the story. Everyone in the industry heard the whispers. I didn't write it, but I didn't need to. The narrative was spreading itself, a quiet, powerful rebrand of who I was and what I'd done. Darren finally called me. Twice. Then he emailed, "I regret how things unfolded. Your departure has made us all reflect on our internal dynamics. I'd be open to a conversation about re-engagement on your terms." It was professional, vague, drenched in fear. I drafted a one-line response. "I appreciate the offer, but I no longer work for people who don't recognize value until it's gone." Then I deleted it. I didn't need to respond at all. Sometimes silence is the only punctuation you need. That Friday, I stood alone in my new office, watching the city lights flicker like static. I thought about how far I'd come. From late-night email drafts for other people's wins to signing contracts under my own name. I thought about the people who doubted me, the ones who dismissed me, and the ones who were now pretending they always believed in me. And then I thought about what came next. Because the empire I was building, it was only just beginning. 3 months later, the old version of my life feels like someone else's story. Vantage is still limping along. Their quarterly numbers are down 42%. Word is, the board isn't happy. Darren's been transitioned into an advisory role, which in corporate terms means they've locked him in a quiet office and are waiting for him to retire or disappear. Kyle didn't last. The promotion that was handed to him started unraveling the moment the support system he didn't know he had, me, vanished. Reports fell through. Client communication failed. Staff started pushing back. He handed in his resignation a few weeks ago. Rumor is he's back at his parents' house, planning to launch a podcast on leadership. The irony writes itself. Meanwhile, NVM Consulting now has 6 full-time employees, 3 interns, and a waitlist of clients. We moved into a full floor of office space last month. Nothing flashy, but efficient, sunlit, open. And every desk is occupied by someone who was once overlooked, underestimated, or talked over. We've built systems smarter than anything I ever saw at Vantage. We've automated logistics chains that used to take teams weeks to analyze. We've saved our clients millions. But the part I'm proudest of? We did it without stepping on each other. No one has to beg to be seen here. No one has to explain their worth twice. Every now and then, I still get the odd message. From former coworkers who suddenly want to grab coffee. From LinkedIn connections who once ignored me, now praising what an inspiring journey I've had. I don't respond to most of them, not out of malice, but because I've learned that not every hand deserves to be reached back for. Some people only recognize your value after they can't use it anymore. My parents eventually found out what happened. Not from me. From my aunt, who read about NVM in a business journal and sent my mother the article with a sticky note that said, "Your daughter's doing well. Thought you'd want to know, we haven't really talked about it. They ask vague questions. I give polite answers. It's easier that way. I'm not interested in proving anything anymore. I've moved beyond needing their approval. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't confrontation. It's elevation. Rising so far above their expectations, their judgment becomes irrelevant. I still walk by Vantage's building now and then. It's on my commute to the gym. Last week, I passed it again. Same lobby, same worn carpet, same heavy glass doors that used to feel like a barrier. This time, I didn't even glance inside. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I'd finally realized it didn't matter. I don't need to revisit what I outgrew. I don't need to reclaim a space I no longer want. I built my own. One night, I sat with Lisa in our office long after everyone else had gone. She was reviewing a proposal from a new potential client. I was finishing budget revisions. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then she said, "You know what's weird? I don't wake up dreading Mondays anymore." I looked up, smiled. Neither do I. Because this time I wasn't waking up to prove myself. I was waking up to build, to create something from scratch with people I trusted, to own my wins, my hours, my future. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Darren had promoted me, if he'd recognized my work, if he'd said the words I waited years to hear. You deserve this. Would I still be there? Still chasing titles? Still explaining my worth in every meeting? Probably. And that's the truth they'll never understand. The moment they denied me wasn't the failure, it was the gift, the permission to stop waiting. I didn't get a trophy. I didn't throw a party. There was no speech, no champagne, no big "I told you so." Just quiet. Just peace. Just the sound of my own footsteps in a place I built with my own hands. A place where I didn't need to be louder, or younger, or more charming. Just smarter, and finally free. Because in the end, I didn't need a seat at their table. I built my own, and made sure every damn chair had a name on it. For people like me. I didn't ask for a promotion. I didn't demand a corner office. I asked for a 5% raise after 3 years of overtime, weekend work, and missed holidays. 5%. That's what it took for my boss to laugh in my face. The sound of it, his laughter, still echoed in my head as I sat frozen across from him. My hands were clenched in my lap beneath the conference table. I had rehearsed my pitch for days. I'd even printed charts showing the revenue increase from the client accounts I managed. I wore my best blazer and a calm smile, but nothing prepared me for the dismissiveness in his voice. "Melissa," Darren said, leaning back in his chair like he was settling in for entertainment. "If you want more money, get a job elsewhere." He chuckled as if he had made some clever joke. 5%, he muttered again, shaking his head. I smiled politely, though my heart was thudding. "Thank you for your time," I said quietly. I gathered my papers with steady fingers, though inside something broke. Not my confidence. That was long gone. Something deeper. Like the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. I'm Melissa Carter, 32, Senior Account Coordinator at Jennings & Rowe Marketing. And until that moment, I'd always been the kind of employee bosses said they could rely on. I never missed a deadline. Took the messiest clients and made them happy. Stayed late, came in early, never complained. And I'd asked for a raise once. Just once. I walked back to my desk. Not even an office, just a corner space by the copy machine. And stared at my screen. My coffee was cold. My inbox was full. Another project had been dumped on me that morning, because Melissa gets things done. They always said that like it was a compliment. Before I go any further, I want to ask those of you watching, have you ever been in a situation like this? Where loyalty felt one-sided? Let me know in the comments. And hit that like button if you've ever stayed too long somewhere that didn't see your worth. It helps more people find this story, because what happened next might help someone else find their voice. That night, I stayed late. Again. Finishing a campaign presentation for a client Darren had forgotten about. When I finally left the building, it was nearly 9 p.m. The parking lot was empty except for the same 3 cars always left behind. Mine, the cleaning crew's, and Darren's. I sat in my car for a long moment, watching the building. The same glass windows I'd looked through every day for 3 years. And I thought about the time I spent trying to prove my worth, as if worth needed to be earned through exhaustion. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened LinkedIn. The message icon had a red notification. I tapped it. "Melissa, if you're ever open to a conversation, we'd love to chat. Your work with Carrington Corp didn't go unnoticed." It was from Emily Saunders, VP of Strategy at Kensington and Wells, our biggest competitor. The message was 2 months old. I stared at it, my finger hovering. Darren's voice echoed. "If you want more money, get a job elsewhere." I replied, "Hi, Emily. Thank you for reaching out. If you're still interested, I'd be happy to have that conversation." Her response came 5 minutes later. "Let's talk tomorrow. I'll call you at noon." I sat back in my car seat, adrenaline rising like I'd done something rebellious. But all I'd done was respond to an offer, an open door. The next morning, I arrived at work at 8:15. Darren walked in at 10:03. He gave me a wink and said, "Still here, Melissa?" "After all that drama?" I smiled back. "Of course, I've got a full day ahead." He didn't know I'd be taking the call that would change everything in 3 hours. I returned to my desk, opened the Carrington file, and started typing the final report I'd promised by Friday. Not because I owed it to him, but because it was mine. My work, my name on every line. At 11:59, I stood up and walked to the empty break room, closed the door, sat down at the small round table where people left forgotten bagels. At 12 o'clock sharp, my phone rang. "Melissa, this is Emily." And just like that, the next chapter of my life began. With one phone call, one open door, one boss's arrogance too blind to see value staring him in the face. I didn't know it yet, but the next 48 hours would reshape everything. "Melissa? This is Emily." Her voice was warm, confident, the kind of voice you instinctively trust. I straightened my posture without realizing it. "Hi, Emily. Thank you for calling. I've followed your work since the Carrington project," she said. "That campaign changed the game. The targeting logic, the conversion boost. It was surgical." I blinked. Darren had taken full credit for that project. At the client meeting, he hadn't even mentioned my name. I'd done the research, built the framework, ran the A/B tests until the numbers made sense. But the client only knew his. "Thank you," I said carefully. "Let's get to the point," Emily said. "We want you here. You're not just talented, you're underutilized. And I know what that feels like." That last part, "I know what that feels like," hit deeper than I expected. "What's the role?" I asked. "Senior campaign strategist. You'd lead your own team. Salaries 35% higher than your current one, with bonuses, profit sharing, and full creative freedom. We don't micromanage talent here." I had to take a breath. "That's generous." "It's fair," she said firmly. "Fair for what you bring to the table. I already ran it by HR. If you want the job, it's yours. But I need an answer within 24 hours. 24 hours? I was expecting a drawn-out process. Interviews, vetting, negotiations. But they already knew my worth. From the outside. Something my own boss never even cared to learn. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said. "Thank you." After I hung up, I didn't move for a long time. Just stared at the break room fridge humming beside me. Somewhere down the hall, Darren was probably cracking jokes over lunch about how needy employees were these days. At 12:30, I returned to my desk and found another task waiting. Urgent, of course. "Can you take care of this?" Darren's email read, "You're the only one I trust to clean up this mess." Funny. Trust me to clean the mess, but not to lead, not to earn more, not to matter. That night I called my mom. She used to work the late shift at a pharmacy while raising me. She understood sacrifice. "You're not seriously thinking about staying, are you?" she asked after I told her about the offer. "I've been at Jennings & Rowe for years. It feels wrong to just leave." "Melissa," she said softly, "wrong is giving your time, your soul to someone who sees you as a tool. You didn't leave. They pushed you." I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about how long I'd bent myself in half to make myself small enough to fit into a system that never made space for me. About how many nights I'd worked past midnight just to prove I was good enough. The next morning, I got up early, made fresh coffee, and sent one message. "Emily, I'm in." Let me know the next steps. Her reply came instantly. Welcome to the team. We'll send over the formal offer and onboarding package by noon. I stared at those words. Welcome to the team. I hadn't heard that since my first day at Jennings & Rowe. And even then, it was said half-heartedly by an overworked receptionist. But now it meant something. At 9 a.m., I walked into the office like any other day, said good morning to reception, sat at my desk, smiled at the people who never noticed when I stayed late or skipped lunch. But inside, I was different. By 10:30, the offer letter was in my inbox. The numbers made my chest tighten. The benefits. The title. The opportunity. I printed the offer, folded it, slipped it into my bag. Then I did something petty. Maybe. Or maybe it was necessary. At 11 o'clock, I asked Darren if he had a moment. He grinned. Back for round 2? More raise negotiations? Not exactly. I handed him the letter. He unfolded it slowly. His grin faded. His eyes scanned the header. Kensington and Wells. Offer of employment. The color drained from his face. You're kidding, he said. I'm not. But they're our biggest competitor, yes. Silence. You said if I wanted more money, I should find another job, I said, keeping my voice calm. So I did. His mouth opened, then closed. This is a joke. You won't last there. It's a pressure cooker. I've worked 60-hour weeks for you for 3 years straight, I said, my voice firmer now. I think I'll manage. He stood up, suddenly agitated. This is betrayal, after everything I've done for you. I looked him in the eye. Everything you've done to me, you mean? Then I smiled, the kind of smile that says I'm finally done explaining myself. Don't worry, Darren, I added. Tomorrow will be my last day, and I'll make sure the transition is unforgettable. I arrived an hour early on my final day, not to be dramatic, not to make a statement, but because I wanted to walk through the office once more. The quiet, untouched version before people arrived. Before the noise, the small talk, the pretense. I had spent over 1,000 days here. Some of them full of pride. Most of them heavy with exhaustion. But today felt weightless. By the time Darren arrived, at 9:57 a.m., latte in hand as usual, I had already cleaned out my desk, packed my mug, my desk calendar, my favorite pen set. The framed photo of my niece from her birthday. The one I missed because of a client emergency. Darren barely looked at me as he walked by. He didn't say good morning, but I saw the tightness in his shoulders. He was unraveling. At 10:30, I sent the company-wide handover email. Short, professional, no drama. Just links to my documentation, organized folders, client notes, and a polite sign-off. Today is my last day. It's been a journey. Wishing everyone the best moving forward. Melissa. By 10:45, the messages started rolling in. From Julie in finance. Wait, you're leaving? What happened? From Kevin in client success. They're going to be in chaos without you. From Emma in creative. Tell me where you're going so I can follow you there. I didn't reply. Not yet. At 11 o'clock, Darren called me into his office. Again. Melissa, he started, forced calm in his voice. I've been thinking. I said nothing. Just looked at him. Maybe we were hasty yesterday. I shouldn't have laughed. That was unprofessional. It took everything in me not to smile. Look, he continued, I've spoken with HR. We can offer a 7% raise. Retroactive to January, I raised an eyebrow. It's a good offer, he added. Fair. Shows how much we value you. You value me now that I've got one foot out the door. I folded my hands. I appreciate the gesture, Darren, but I've already accepted another offer. He frowned. That doesn't have to be final. You haven't even left yet. We can match whatever they're offering. I leaned forward just slightly. Can you match a team that respects me? A manager who credits me for my work? A culture that promotes based on impact, not favoritism? He didn't answer. I'm not just leaving for money, I said quietly. I'm leaving because I was invisible here, until I became a threat. Darren exhaled sharply. If you go, you're burning bridges, Melissa. No, I said, standing. You lit the match the day you laughed at me for asking to be valued. I left his office without another word. It was noon when I got the text from Emily. Just confirming. You're still good to start Monday? Absolutely, I typed back. Let me know what to prep over the weekend. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. Actually, you might want to check your email. Thought you'd like to see this. I refreshed my inbox. A forwarded chain from a client I had worked with for months. A big one, Sterling Biotech. A note at the top from Sterling's VP. We're disappointed to hear Melissa is leaving. She was the main reason we stayed with Jennings and Rowe. Please confirm who will be handling our account as we're reconsidering our position. I stared at the screen, pulse racing. Attached was a copy of the email Sterling had sent to Darren. I forwarded it to my personal email and hit save. At 3 o'clock, I was called into HR. They handed me the exit paperwork, the usual forms. Confidentiality, non-disparagement, final paycheck confirmation. Then came the curveball. We'd like you to sign this non-compete, the HR rep said, sliding the last page toward me. I laughed. For the first time all week, I actually laughed. This wasn't in my original contract, I said. We're asking employees to agree to it going forward, just a formality. I pushed it back across the table. I won't be signing that. But I'm leaving, not dying, and I'm not signing away my right to work. They looked stunned, as if they had never expected a polite, quiet employee like me to say no. At 4:15, I walked to Darren's office one last time, dropped off the company phone. My badge. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me, but I could feel the panic radiating off him like heat. I walked out of Jennings and Rowe for the final time at 4:23 p.m. No farewell party. No send-off. Just the quiet knowledge that everything had changed. The next morning would be Darren's to handle alone. Client calls, transition failures, questions he couldn't answer. And I would be nowhere near the fallout. Instead, I'd be walking into Kensington and Wells, with my name on the door, my work recognized, and my worth no longer a question. And that, I thought, was the beginning of something bigger than a raise. Monday morning at 8:30 a.m., I stepped into the sleek, open-floor headquarters of Kensington and Wells. Sunlight spilling in through tall glass windows, voices buzzing with energy, and my name already printed on the welcome packet sitting on my new desk. Welcome to the team, Melissa, the front desk assistant had said, offering me a fresh cup of coffee. You're going to love it here. And I already did. My new office wasn't huge. It wasn't on a high floor or full of expensive furniture, but it had a door, a window, a quiet space that was mine. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I wasn't just occupying space. I belonged in it. Before I'd even logged into my new email, I saw it. The news. Subject line, Sterling Biotech terminates Jennings and Rowe contract. I clicked. An internal memo had been leaked. Sterling's leadership cited the departure of key personnel as a major reason. My name wasn't mentioned explicitly, but I didn't need it to be. Emily walked into my office just as I finished reading. She raised an eyebrow, holding her phone up. I take it you've seen the news? I nodded slowly. That was fast. Turns out, when you're the glue, everything cracks once you leave. I smiled, but only halfway. They'll blame me. They'll try, she said. But the truth is, they let you go long before you walked out the door. I spent the morning meeting my new team. 3 brilliant strategists, 1 intern named Lexi, and a data scientist who reminded me of myself 5 years ago. Eager, careful, always waiting for approval. You don't have to prove anything here, I told her when we sat down to review her first project draft. If you've got ideas, bring them. She blinked, surprised. even if they're different from yours? Especially if they are. By 2 p.m., my inbox was flooded with news alerts, LinkedIn messages, and quiet whispers from former colleagues at Jennings and Rowe. From Emma, Darren's freaking out. Sterling's gone. Now Bioplex is threatening to pull too. From Kevin, he just called an emergency meeting. You should have seen his face. I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was clarity. This was never about punishing Darren. It was about what happens when a company builds its reputation on people it refuses to see. I didn't have time to dwell, though, because at 3:15, I was called into a leadership meeting with Emily and the executive team. Melissa, the COO, said, Sterling has asked that you personally oversee the transition. They want continuity, confidence, and you. I blinked. Of course, I'd be honored. And just like that, I became the face of a $4.2 million contract. By Tuesday, the dust hadn't even settled, and yet Jennings and Rowe was hemorrhaging clients. 3 accounts had paused campaigns. 2 had requested exit clauses. I watched it unfold, not with glee, but with a strange sense of inevitability. This is what happens when leadership forgets that loyalty is earned, not owed. That afternoon, I got a message from Julie in finance. HR just announced layoffs. They're starting with account support. Everyone's blaming you, Melissa. I stared at that message longer than I wanted to admit. I typed, deleted, typed again, then finally responded, I'm sorry they're going through that. But I didn't cause this. They did, when they chose to ignore what their people were worth. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by a mix of pride and guilt. Pride in my decision. Guilt for the people who were now facing the fallout. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about Lexi, about Emma and Kevin, about the people I used to eat lunch with at that sticky cafeteria table while Darren sat in steakhouse boardrooms taking credit for our work. And I thought about the cost of standing up. It wasn't just mine. The next morning, Emily knocked on my door. I wanted to talk to you about something, she said, sitting down. We're expecting more resumes from Jennings and Rowe, people looking for a place to land. I figured. I'd like you to help us review them, she said, especially for the Sterling team. You know who the strong ones are? Who deserves a second shot? I felt something shift inside me. Power, not for revenge, but for restoration. I'd be honored, I said. As she stood to leave, she paused. Oh, and Darren reached out. I blinked. What? He sent a message through the contact form on our site, asked for a meeting, said he'd like to consult for us, share insights about the client landscape. I let out a short breath. What did you say? I said we already have the insight we need. Emily smiled. Her name is Melissa. 3 weeks after my first day at Kensington and Wells, I stood at the head of the Sterling project team's strategy table, pointing to projected ROI graphs that made even the most skeptical execs lean forward. Every metric had gone up since the transition. Client satisfaction, deliverables met early, new campaign reach. My team delivered. Not because they feared me, but because they were heard, respected, trusted. And for the first time in my life, I was the one guiding the room. Not quietly, not from behind the scenes, but as a name on the report, a face in the pitch. Recognition felt strange, like walking into a new version of yourself you didn't know existed. Still, it came with a weight I hadn't expected, because while my star rose, Jennings and Rowe continued to unravel. By now, the layoffs had reached middle management. Word spread that Bioplex and Marintech had pulled out. Nearly half the office had been let go. The rest were living in constant fear. And my name was still on their lips. One afternoon, I received an email from Emma. She had always been the quietly brilliant designer who never got credit for her best work. Melissa, they cut my whole team yesterday. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've never worked anywhere else. I just wanted you to know. I'm not mad. You did what we all wish we had the guts to do. That one stung more than I expected. I forwarded her portfolio to Emily. Within 2 days, Emma was being interviewed by our design director. But it wasn't just Emma. Over the following week, I quietly compiled a list of people I used to work with. Ones who stayed late, delivered under pressure, lifted others up even when they weren't lifted themselves. People like Julie, Kevin, Marcia from QA, Antonio in IT. I knew who deserved more, and I knew how to find them. It became a side mission. Every night after work, I combed through LinkedIn profiles. Every lunch break, I opened old Slack messages and client feedback logs. I remembered who made the machine run while Darren played executive. And one by one, I found ways to bring them here. Or at least try. But not everyone wanted to come. Some ignored my messages. Some replied politely with, "Thanks, but I'm not ready to leave the past behind." One message stayed with me longer than I'd like to admit. It was from Patrice, former accounting lead. "You got your promotion by watching the house burn after you left. Don't act like a hero now." I saved it in a folder I'd started called The Cost, because that's what it was. The cost of getting what you're worth when the system was built to keep you quiet. A week later, Emily and I presented the Talent Recovery Initiative to the board. It was a formal proposal to prioritize displaced Jennings and Rowe staff in our hiring pipeline. Training programs, referral bonuses, partnership with a career services firm. We'd even offer consulting positions to those nearing retirement or in career transitions. "You're sure this is the right move?" one board member asked. "There are former competitors' people. Some might carry bad habits." Emily answered before I could. "They were never the problem," she said. "They were the solution their leadership failed to see." The board approved it unanimously. By the end of that month, 14 former Jennings and Rowe employees had joined us. Emma was promoted within 2 weeks. Antonio rebuilt our internal comm systems in record time. Kevin designed a new feedback loop that improved client response time by 30%. And the culture? Stronger, humbler, real. One morning, as I walked into the building, I saw a familiar face in the lobby. Darren. He looked like a ghost of himself. Thinner, paler, carrying a worn leather briefcase and a nervous smile. He stood up as I approached. "Melissa," he said, voice tight. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "What are you here for?" I asked, keeping my distance. "They're saying you're hiring former J&R people. I need work. I've got a family, a mortgage. You know how this industry works. Once your name's attached to failure." He trailed off, waiting. I didn't speak for a moment. Then I said, "I'm not in charge of executive hiring." "I'll take anything," he added quickly. "Consulting, training, even admin." I looked at the man who once told me I was replaceable, now standing in front of me, asking for a second chance. "You said I burned bridges," I reminded him. He looked down. Turns out I was the one holding the matches. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just told him I'd pass along his resume. As I walked away, I realized something important. I didn't need to destroy him to win. He'd done that to himself. I just stopped trying to prove I belonged in a place that never saw me. 6 months had passed since I walked out of Darren's office for the last time. In that time, Jennings and Rowe lost 4 major clients, laid off over 60% of their staff, and quietly pulled out of 2 national campaigns. Rumors circulated about a potential merger. Others whispered about liquidation. I didn't watch with joy. I didn't watch with guilt either. I just observed, detached, like watching a familiar house fall in on itself, knowing you tried to fix the foundation, but no one listened. My life looked very different now. I had an office with a door and a view. A team of people who asked for my input, not my silence. A boss who credited my ideas publicly. A workload that was still heavy, but not thankless. And for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night. Not from lack of responsibility, but because I no longer carried the weight of being invisible. One morning, I arrived early. before the building filled with footsteps and small talk. I liked the quiet hours best. It reminded me of all those mornings at Jennings and Rowe when I was the first one in and no one noticed. Only now I noticed, and it made all the difference. I made coffee, opened my inbox, reviewed a campaign brief from one of our junior strategists, Lexi. It was sharp, creative, and confident. Her voice was in the work. I made a note to tell her that. No edits, just a well done. Before I closed the file, I saw a line in her footer. Mentored by Melissa Carter. It made me pause. It was the kind of acknowledgement I used to wish for. Long ago. At 11 a.m., Emma stopped by my office. They offered me the lead designer role, she said, eyes wide. I grinned. Of course they did. I'm not sure I'm ready. You've been ready for a while. You're just not used to being seen. She smiled, a little sad. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't left. I nodded. So do I. But you did, she added, and it made space for the rest of us to believe we could too. That afternoon, I reviewed another batch of resumes from former Jennings and Rowe employees. I didn't have to. I could have delegated it, but I wanted to, because I remembered their faces, their efforts, the way we all tried to hold up a system that was never built to hold us. Not everyone made it out. Some disappeared from LinkedIn entirely. Others pivoted to different industries. A few, like Patrice, still hadn't responded to outreach, but I kept a folder of their names. Not because I owed them, but because I understood the cost of staying. At 4 p.m., I got a message from HR. Subject, Darren Wells, application. I stared at it for a long time. He'd applied for a consulting role. No note, no cover letter. Just a name I knew too well and a resume full of jargon and half-truths. I didn't open it. Just clicked mark as read and closed the tab. There was nothing left to say. The truth was, Darren had already taught me the most important lesson of my career. Not by mentoring me, but by underestimating me. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. That night, as I packed up, I glanced at the framed copy of my original offer letter, the one from Jennings and Rowe. I'd kept it as a reminder of how little they thought I was worth. Next to it, I placed a small card Lexi had given me on my first day as her mentor. Thank you for making space for people like me. I hope I make you proud. She already had. As I turned off the lights in my office, I thought back to that moment. Darren's laughter echoing off the glass walls, his smirk, his dismissal, and how those two sentences, if you want more money, get a job elsewhere, had pushed me out of one life and into another, a better one. One I built with quiet resolve, hard choices, and an understanding that value is never determined by a title, a manager, or a company. It's something you define for yourself. The real raise wasn't in my paycheck. It was in the respect I finally received, the peace I earned, the future I created. And no one could ever take that away again.